Once again, we greet you from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We thank all of our fans of the Hall of Fame, for joining us today for a virtual Curator Spotlight. And today we're going to be looking at an exhibit up on the second floor of the museum. It is called Moberg, Big League Spy. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison, and I'm very glad to be joined by our senior curator here at the Hall of Fame, Tom Schieber, who was actively involved in putting this exhibit together and has researched the topic of Moe Berg quite a bit over the last few years. Tom, thanks for joining us. How are you doing as you broadcast from home?
I'm doing great. Yeah, welcome to my little upstairs library where I'm doing a lot of work these days.
Very good. Yes, with your schedule, similar to a lot of people's schedules here at the Hall of Fame, kind of a split between being in the office and being at home. Generally, I come in for the programs that we're doing online, and that's why I'm in the Bud Selig Center right now, which is right next to the Hall of Fame's educational offices. So we're going to look today at an exhibit that is what we call a temporary exhibit. It has been up for the last 3 years, and it did begin in the year 2018. Tom, going back to when the exhibit opened, what was the motivation to create the exhibit at that particular time?
Well, that was right around, we first started thinking about it when we heard that there was going to be a movie based on Nick Davidoff's book, The Catcher Was a Spy, which is an excellent, there's been a number of books about Moberg, but this is an excellent book. And it had been optioned, and they decided they were going to make a movie. And I thought, well, this might be kind of a good topic for an exhibit. I did a quick check. I knew that we had a number of Moberg objects in our collection. And as you know, Bruce, our collection is stunning. It's amazing the various stories that we can tell. And I thank my lucky stars every day I get to work with this incredible collection of baseball material. And so we took a quick look and we said, you know what? We think we can have a small exhibit that just touches on the incredibly complex story of Moe Berg, because it's a very complex story, so we can't tell the whole thing. And so we thought we could pull it off. Let's try and do that. And maybe some people who see the movie would be interested in seeing the exhibit, and maybe people who see the exhibit would be interested in learning a little bit more about this fascinating individual.
For those who have been to the Hall of Fame before, maybe planning a visit sometime in the fall, we certainly hope that's the case. This exhibit is located up on the second floor, and it's really kind of on the outer wall just before you get to the Diamond Dreams Women in Baseball exhibit. There really was no exhibit there before this. That wall was simply kind of a collage of All-American Girls League and women's baseball photographs. So this exhibit really kind of carved out its own place on the second floor of the museum. And you mentioned a moment ago that this was a very complicated man, Tom. It would take several hours of programming to delve into all of the personality quirks. We've talked about the fact that he was a very mysterious person and kind of liked it that way. He was known as a hoarder. He was known for having very specific rules about handling his newspaper. So when you have a complicated person and a complicated personality, it can make for a complicated exhibit. What were some of the really difficult challenges you faced in trying to decide what can we put together? Because it is limited space, it is a temporary exhibit, but you wanted to highlight certain things. So talk about those challenges.
Right. Well, so he is a complicated guy. You hit the nail on the head. But we really didn't want to make a complicated exhibit. The exhibit should be an enjoyable experience for visitors. They shouldn't be taxed and worn out by it. So how do we take this complex story and simplify it? And as you noted, we couldn't possibly tell the entire story of Moe Berg. You can only scratch the surface. So our hope was, let's give people a sense of the key elements, and hopefully people come away going, wow, this is interesting. I want to learn more. Because you're not done. If you've gone through the exhibit, and it's not very, very large, but you will hopefully come out saying, oh, I want to learn more about this, because this guy is a very interesting character. And so in order to do that, I need to take this complex story and try and make it less complex. And so I looked at the basic key elements of what was so cool about Moe Berg and the Moberg story. And I broke it down into bite-sized chunks. And I thought I'll just have a few artifacts to talk about this one part of the story about how he was such a great ball player. Now, amongst major leaguers, he was a less than average ball player, but the guy was a major leaguer. So if you make the major leaguers, you're a great ball player. But also he had this incredible background. He was an extremely intellectual guy. He was a real scholar. I wanted to talk about that aspect of his life. And then, of course, the one that probably a lot of people are familiar with is that he also was a spy during World War II. These are very interesting, very different kinds of elements to an individual's character. So I tried to break that down. And then also the fourth element, in a sense, is let's talk about the movie as well. And we can't see it in the picture that we're showing right now, but on the back side of the wall that's jutting out on the right, on the back side of that is another part of the exhibit that has, and we can talk about it later on, talks a little bit about the book that Nick Davidoff wrote in the mid-1990s and the movie that it was based upon. And so we take this complex story, try to simplify it, give people interesting artifacts and interesting individual stories, and tease them to learn a little bit more.
There's also a video component. Some people might see the video screen kind of toward the top, toward the center of the photograph there. And I believe that video is narrated by another colorful character, Bill Lee.
That's right. That's right. It's a video that we did not produce. It was produced by ESPN, and Christina Burchard directed it. It's about a little bit less than 20 minutes. And we play it on an endless loop. So you can come in there and you might come in the middle and just watch it all the way through. And it gives you a good sense of the story as well. Obviously, it's not done through artifacts or through ephemera. It's done through moving images, and that's how they tell stories in film. But we tell stories using these objects in our collection or images or whatever we can get our hands on. But it does a nice job of it, and so ESPN was very gracious in allowing us to run this movie, and people enjoy it. It's a wonderful. It really is fun, and Bill Lee, who is a great character himself, does a great job. I think he's a great narrator, really.
Yeah, he's very good. Absolutely. Now, you do break down Berg into different areas: ball player, scholar, spy. So let's look at those different categories. Let's begin with Berg as a ball player. And we see here an artifact, which is obviously a catcher's mask. Looks to be in terrific condition. I'm guessing this is from what, the 1930s, but it looks pretty pristine.
Yeah, it is great condition, and this is a catcher's mask that was used by Moe Berg, interestingly, it's what's known as a spitter model, and because you can see there's a little circle where the mouth would be, so if you're a tobacco chewer, you can just spit right out of another great talent is to be able to spit the tobacco juice out without having to flip up your mask. I don't believe actually, as it turns out, that Moe was a tobacco user, but that was the model. But we wanted to show something that was very catchery because he was primarily a catcher. He actually played shortstop when he was a kid, and played shortstop for Princeton when he played baseball at Princeton, and he was a star on the team there, and even played shortstop in the major leagues when he first came up. But he was eventually converted to catcher, and that's where he really solidified his career. Because he was an extremely good defensive catcher. As a matter of fact, he had a record that he set that lasted a dozen years. It was the American League record for most consecutive errorless games. And it stretched from 1932 to 1934. So he had that record for about a dozen years.
Tom, do we know roughly the year of this artifact and who donated it?
The year, it's a broad range of when it was. I think you're right that the spitter model is basically in the 30s, that era, and he probably wore it late in his career. His career as a player lasted till 39. He coached after that, and so it's reasonable that that's what he would have kept, as something from late in the career, and it came in from his brother. Actually, his brother donated it to the Hall of Fame.
Interesting. He was known as a pretty good defensive catcher. That was the strong part of his game. So
Yes.
it's nice to have something from that aspect of being a catcher.
Absolutely. You know, his pitchers really did praise him, and some of them even were sort of lamenting the fact that he wasn't a great hitter because he was such a good catcher. If only he had been a better hitter, and actually had an injury in 1930 that hampered his hitting ability and specifically his running ability, so he couldn't beat out some balls. But boy, if he had only been a better batter, he would have been able to play more, because he was basically a second, third string catcher most of his career. You know, just because it was a little bit too much of a liability to have him batting all the time. But called a great game. Not only did he have talent athletically from a catching physical standpoint, but he was a real intellectual and really just knew the batters very well, knew how to play the game. He wrote a great and still important paper about called Pitchers and Catchers, or Catchers and Pitchers, I can't remember the order, for the Atlantic in the early 1940s. And it's a fascinating read, very intellectual view of the complexities of that relationship between pitcher and catcher, and how, you know, it really dominates the game on the field.
We do have something representing his offensive game as well. And here we see a bat, Hillerich and Bradsby model. And this is one that Moberg did use. Interesting knob on the bat, maybe a little bit different than what we're used to today. But tell us a little bit more about this artifact, Tom.
Yeah, if we wanted to make sure that we talked about him as a well-rounded player, you know, he did have a 243 lifetime batting average. Probably would have been a decent amount higher had he, one, not injured himself, and two, the less playing time you have, the harder it is to get in the groove when you're batting. So, you know, he would have had a higher batting average, but, you know, those are the breaks. Everybody can give an excuse as to why they didn't make it in the big leagues. I've got a ton of them. But he did have that weakness, and but we wanted to make sure that we showed another element to his ball playing. So this is a bat from the mid to late 1930s.
Now, Tom, at this time, had hitters kind of made the transition from the thick-handled, heavy bats to the lighter bats? Where exactly were we in terms of bat evolution, and what kind of bat Berg was using? This is
a straight-ahead average bat. And yes, so thick-handled bats are moving out by the 19-teens, actually. And certainly when you've got Joe Jackson and a Babe Ruth in the late teens, and then through the 20s, and a George Sisler, and these guys who are they're using a thinner handled bat. And well, Ruth is an outlier. He still used a very heavy bat, but he was just ridiculously strong and had great wrists. But bats became lighter and lighter. But this is a pretty average bat.
Yeah.
For the day.
Yeah, it shows some samples of wear and tear. You have what appears to be pine tar near the handle, near the gripping area, and some scuffs toward the barrel of the bat. So it looks like it got a decent amount of use.
Yeah, he wasn't swinging and missing. it looked really pristine if he's swinging and missing. He's just swinging and hitting balls that he can't run out.
Yeah. And did this come from his brother as well?
It did. It did.
Very nice. All right, let's talk about Moe Berg as a scholar. It has been said by some that he spoke up to a dozen languages. We now know that that is almost certainly exaggerated, and we'll have you explain. He was a lawyer. He was somebody who traveled the globe. So there's lots to tell just with this aspect of him as a scholar and as an academic. How, Tom, did you tackle all of this?
That's a great question, and it was not easy, because when it comes to, let's say, talking about a baseball career, you know, let's use some equipment to help tell that story, or we have actually, we're only showing you a few of the many artifacts in this exhibit, but we have a number of telegrams and that say come try out for the Dodgers, and you've been traded by the Senators, you know. So those are pretty obvious, but how do you tell the story of, let's say, for example, someone's ability with languages? It's not obvious what artifact would tell that story. Yeah. But you know what? We have this beautiful medal that he won for proficiency in French, actually. He went to school at Barringer High School in Newark, New Jersey, and he won this for his proficiency in language. And this is from when he was 16 years old. So I thought, oh, how fantastic! I can actually talk about language, because it's not like I said, not very obvious what artifact would do that. So we have this. We actually have. I don't have a picture of it here, but we also have a Japanese language textbook. Also owned by Moe. Clearly, it was something that he used. He dabbled in languages all the time. So there were certain challenges to telling the story, but we were very fortunate to be able to have this wealth of artifacts to do that with, and ephemera.
Tom, about how large is this medal to scale?
Oh, I'm terrible here. I have to get my little ruler out, and I'll tell you, because I'm just terrible at estimating these things. But yeah, you can't get any size. I'd say it's about almost 3 inches in diameter.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe a 1/4 inch thick. It's substantial. It's bronze. It's not flimsy.
Yeah.
So it's a very nice, beautiful medal. On the back, it says to Moe Berg. It's to Morris Berg. Very neat.
Yeah. If I could talk about the photo of him on the left just a little bit. Like a lot of us, he doesn't look real comfortable posing in front of the camera. He's kind of giving the cameraman this look, hurry up and do this. I've got work to do.
Yeah, he's got all of his law books out in front of him, and what you can't see is on the side, because I've cropped it out, but on the side is a big old bookshelf full of books. So he studied languages at Princeton, graduated magna cum laude from Princeton, and actually he was at NYU for a little while before that, and then he went to Columbia and got a law degree while he was playing baseball, by the way. So I mean, it's amazing, and he loved books. Now, when you're a lawyer, you better love books because you got to read a lot. But he had them with him all the time, and he devoured them. It was just, it's stereotypical of a guy who is a true scholar. He just loved reading, and that's the number one way to learn, is to read.
Yeah. You mentioned Columbia University a moment ago, and this is actually a letter with the letterhead of the university. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this is the letter where he had requested that he come to that he get out of some schoolwork to go to spring training. So that I believe he was with the White Sox at the time, so that he needed to get to spring training. One, you got to do that to get ready for the season, but also he's really starting to learn the new position of being a catcher, because that was sort of the year that he really started focusing on catching. So and they said, yeah, okay, we'll let you off. We understand, and good luck with the baseball career. So I mean, he couldn't have been a bum in school. They would have said, well, you know what? Maybe you're not really interested in Columbia and in law. We'll see you later. But they said, no, that's okay. Yeah, we're fine with that.
Yeah. We actually see his home address. I don't know if that's an apartment or a house, 92 South 13th Street. Wonder if there is still remnants of that, and maybe a plaque for Moe Berg there. That's perhaps a question for another day. As you mentioned, the letter comes from the dean's office, the assistant to the dean, John L. Grant, and just an interesting piece of correspondence. And we have the original, I would imagine.
That one, we actually do have the original. Now, we don't display the original because we're concerned about preserving this object. And there's a number of paper items, not only in this exhibit, but throughout the museum, where we've decided that the potential damage due to light and the air is such that we would rather show a facsimile and keep the original to preserve it for longer, because we do want objects to remain around for as long as possible. Certain objects are more robust, so the bat is more robust, and so we're happy to display a real bat and not a facsimile of bat. We don't do it very often. I'll tell you this: if you walk through the museum, there's very few facsimiles, but if we do have a facsimile, it's going to say it. So if you see a document and it doesn't say facsimile and it's clearly not a blown up baseball card that's 5 feet high, which is not real, but if it doesn't say facsimile, you're seeing the real thing. We're not trying to sneak anything past anyone. So, this exhibit relied on a number of pieces of ephemera, paper-based items, and we erred on the side of making sure that we showed facsimiles to preserve them.
We have another paper document here, and some of our younger viewers might not have any idea what in the world is a telegram. Tell us about that.
Well, a telegram is a way that people would communicate by way of a wire. And so you would write something down and it would be telegraphed by way of wire over to another location and then retranslated out into text. And they would charge you basically on per word. So if you used 20 words, that was going to be much more expensive than 10 words. So people were very judicious with how many words they didn't go on and on and on. And this was a really cool telegram from Earl Mack, who's the son of Connie Mack, the longtime manager and owner of the Philadelphia Athletics. And Earl was charged with rounding up people for a baseball tour to go to Japan after the 1934 season. And they needed, to field a ball club. They're going to play something like 16 games in and around Tokyo. And they asked Moe if he'd come. And it's really interesting because, the people that are going to this game, so the big name was Babe Ruth. They finally got Babe Ruth to go, and he was a huge hit. But Earl Averill, Lou Gehrig, Charlie Gehringer, Jimmy Fox. It was a star-studded team, plus Moe Berg, who was not a star. But the ball players all really liked Moe. He was a very likable guy. He was very entertaining. He was very smart, but he could kind of fit in with any crowd. He could fit in with a ball player. He could fit in with the wives. He could fit whatever. He was a very amenable, nice guy and fun guy to be with. But also he's a good backup catcher, so that's fine. So they needed a backup, and he came. But then on top of that, he actually he was known as an intellectual, and they thought, and people knew that he had affinity for languages, and so they thought he would be a great person to have on the tour. Less about the baseball ability, not that he was a slouch, but he's just like the perfect guy to go on this tour. And he very excitedly wrote back and said, "I'm in."
Tom, is there anything to the story or the theory that he was included in this tour of Japan because of possible connections, either at that time or in the future, to the American government? Anything at all to that?
Well, there's lots of rumor about it, but none of it really adds up to really making sense. So, we don't know everything, so I can't say definitively one way or the other, but it really doesn't add up that he had any nefarious purposes to being on the tour. Although, boy, that story is out there a lot, and we'll talk about that in a while. But
yeah.
No, there's really not much to corroborate that he was there to do something for the U.S. government. He might have thought that on his own, but
yeah. It's funny. I look at this Western Union telegram, and I hear some of your commentary about how they had to minimize the number of letters for cost concerns. In a way, this kind of reminds me, this is like an early version of texting, using as few characters and as few symbols as possible, maybe not for monetary reasons, but for convenience reasons today. And then even at the top corner, it says the sender of this message authorizes us to say that a telegraphic reply is desired. And that kind of reminds me of email, where you get sent like an email to go to a meeting, and it says, well, the person sending this wants a reply. So we kind of see some weird precursors to the modern world of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still a form of communication. And listen, that even happens when people are talking. That's the most basic form of communication, right? You're talking. Yeah. And the way I do an inflection with my voice might be a clue for you to respond or not to respond or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, and it just changes. Whatever. Every 5 or 10 years, it gets a new form, and who knows what's going to be the version of communication du jour in a few years.
Tom, the one thing that befuddles me though is the big XU in the red letters. I have no idea what that means. I don't know if you looked into that at all.
I haven't.
Okay.
You got me. We'll figure it out. How about
Yeah,
that?
we'll have to take a further look at that. For some reason, I didn't notice it before, and now it's just kind of jumping out. I'm not sure what that means, but we'll try to figure it out at some point. In the meantime, we want to look at some other artifacts, and this is a really beautiful one. We have used this in the past for VIP spotlights here at the Hall of Fame that we often do in the Bullpen Theater. We're not doing them currently, but we have done them pre-virus, and they've been very popular.
Yeah.
And I've seen this jersey that belonged to Moe Berg. It was from that tour. It's just a beautiful piece. But tell us more about it, if you would, Tom.
It's a beautiful piece. Well, okay, so first of all, it's unusual because it's not a major league uniform. And so that in and of itself is pretty kind of fun. Oh, I had not seen this before. Two, it's very patriotic, right? They're representing the U.S. In November or December of '34. So that's kind of fun to see that. The stars and bars shield on the right sleeve and the interwoven U.S. on the left sleeve. But the other thing is, as you mentioned, it's in great condition. Well, why is it in great condition? Well, there's two reasons. One, it was only used for 16 games. I mean, it's just used for this one purpose, is the tour to Japan. But it's even better condition than Charlie Gehringer's or Babe Ruth's because it really wasn't even used very much by Moe because he's not really getting into games very much. So he's sitting on the bench with this. He's not diving in the dirt with it every day, and he's not sweating heavily at every day. But when he comes in to catch here and there, he's using it. So I would be very surprised and actually a little concerned if it was heavily worn. I'd go, well, what's going on here? Because he wasn't heavily used during the tour. But it is a wonderful object with lots of great stories you can tell with it.
What's the material, and why do the buttons only go about 2/3 of the way down the front?
So it's tucked in the rest of the way in your pants, so you don't need to go any further than that. That was not uncommon. Some uniforms would be buttoned all the way down. Some would do part. Some would, remember in the 1970s, you didn't have any buttons. It was a pullover style, right? So the styles changed. It's a wool, and it was a typical material that was used at the time, which, by the way, is pretty heavy, and it's not like this magical wicking material they have today where your sweat wicks away and you remain cool. If you're running around in the heat, remember it's all day games. When they were in Japan, they were all day games. It probably was a little bit cooler since it's November, so it might have been kind of nice, and you might wear an undershirt under it. But this is typical baseball material, yeah, nothing unusual there.
I particularly like the logo, All Americans. It's really nicely done. Yeah. My screen is actually obscured by you and by other things, so I can't see the left sleeve all that well, but I know that there's an insignia there. Tell us about that on the left sleeve.
Yes, it's a U in red and an S in white, but it's intertwining kind of like you see with other uniforms where you get like an NY intertwining for the Yankees or for the Giants, or an STL for St. Louis. It's a very common style for logos to have this sort of intertwining letters, but it stands for the U.S.
Yeah. Some might look at it though and say it really looks more like SU.
Well, if you say tomato, I say tomato, whatever.
Yeah. That's very interesting, though. Just as you said, a wonderful piece, and one that I've been lucky enough to talk about here at the Hall of Fame as well. Here's another interesting piece, and this is something we don't have a lot of. We don't have many passports among our collection of documents and papers, but we do happen to have this passport, and I assume this is for the Japan tour.
It was for a number of years. It actually was his passport from 1932 to 1936. So he had used it before the tour, and he used it after the tour. And but it was a challenge because we have it as a physical object. It's not. This one is in the exhibit, not as a facsimile, and it is open to this page, but I really want to open it to multiple pages because it's very cool. Different pages have different stamps from different countries. I mean, there's stamps in there from China, from India, from Poland, from Iraq, from Japan, obviously. So it's really awesome, and it's a great way to show. I mean, what better object to talk about a guy who loved traveling than his passport? And we couldn't have dreamt up a better object, and thankfully we have it. So yeah, it's his passport, and shows his whereabouts for 4 or 5 years.
And because it's a passport, there's probably no doubt that's his authentic signature.
Yeah, actually, that is his authentic signature, right?
Yeah. Very cool piece. Now, we talk about the story of Moe Berg. We talk about him as a ball player. We talk about him as a scholar, as an academic. And then, of course, everybody wants to talk about him as a spy. We've all heard about that. It is completely true from everything that I have heard, although maybe exaggerated in some ways. But how did that come about? How did Moe Berg make this transition from major league ball player to big league spy?
He wanted to be a spy. He wanted to be a spy, and quite frankly, he was well suited to being a spy. You know, we haven't really talked a lot about his personality, and that really is one of the most important things to talk about. And that is, he was a guy who loved learning. He loved learning about other people. He didn't love other people learning about him. That was of no interest, and actually he would avoid it. He didn't feel comfortable with that. Well, that's what spies do, is they learn about other people and other things, and they try to otherwise not be visible. And that was his personality for a long time. It also helps that he was a smart guy, and it also helps that he got along with people very well, and took them into the confidence. He just had an air about him where people felt very comfortable with him. He had all the little check marks that you want for a guy doing espionage. So he wanted to do this, and he applied. And we're going to see his application, or one of the pages. It's a multiple page application. This is actually one of the pages. But he applied in 1943, right in the middle of World War II, to join the OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services. And it's a predecessor of the CIA, what we have today as the CIA. Mm-hmm. But it started right at the beginning of the war. And they very quickly were just trying to do this espionage, and they were a little bit maybe more cavalier with who would be working where and how they would be working. So they got a guy who had absolutely no background in spying, and was really a ball player and a smart guy. But he applied, and they picked him, and they said, yeah, we'd like you to work for us. This is one of them. It's a multi-page application. And this is one I chose because it does address what you were talking about, the story about his linguistic abilities. And, you know, the old joke, which is a good one, is that Moberg could speak 12 languages, but he couldn't hit in any of them. And you know, I've heard that joke a million times, and it still brings a smile on my face. It's pretty funny. Well, they were basically kind of right about the hitting part. He really wasn't a great hitter, but it's an exaggeration on the speaking languages part. Listen, the guy was an incredibly talented linguist, and he did graduate magna cum laude from Princeton in languages. I mean, it's not like he wasn't a talent there, but as you can see, this document is what he's telling the U.S. government he can and can't do. And he says French, Spanish, and Portuguese, he speaks fair. He could have said higher than fair. You can say slight, fair, or fluent. In none of these languages does he say fluent. He says fair for those three. And Italian, German, and Japanese, he says slight. Now, I would love to be slight in any of those languages. See, I'm hopelessly English only. So the guy is obviously extremely talented and has great ability with languages, but that he speaks 12 languages is an exaggeration. Now, he also didn't mention that he did do a lot in Sanskrit, but Sanskrit's not going to help anybody in the war. And he had some other languages as well, but this is that he would certainly say was less than slight. That's the lowest you can write here. There's nothing lower than slight. So the story about his ability in languages is impressive and exaggerated at the same time. And boy, there's nothing better than this smoking gun that really shows that that was the case.
It's interesting to me, Tom, that section 25, religious affiliation,
yeah,
pretty much leaves blank. There's a dash next to the
Correct.
church of attendance, and then nothing in terms of address or name of minister or priest.
Right. He was culturally is Jewish. His ancestry is Jewish. His parents were non-observant Jews. As a matter of fact, that they were pretty fanatically, no, I don't want to say fanatically, but they really didn't want to practice religion, and he was not raised that way. A lot of people felt that he felt it was his duty as a Jew to be involved in the war because of what was happening with the Holocaust. And but that's not really the case. He wanted to do it because of patriotic reasons. He wanted to be involved because he really enjoyed the idea of being a spy, and but being a spy and helping the country was absolutely number one, number two, number three, number four. It really had essentially nothing to do with his Jewish background. And yes, and actually that's a really great point that he does not mention anything there. That was not anything he felt was critical.
Yeah, interesting. Here we have another interesting document called the Oath of Office. So at this point, he's been hired, but he has to sign this document here.
Yeah, if you want to get hired, you got to sign it. And so that is the, yep, I'm going to be working for the OSS, and here's what I solemnly swear. I thought that was a wonderful document. Now this document, the one you saw before, those are not in our collection. We just have photocopies of, we had a large collection of photocopies of documents that were top secret before, and then they were declassified. And so then you can read them. So many of what you're seeing, the previous document, this one, and I think the next one, at one time were top secret. You could not see them if you wanted to, but they have been declassified.
Next up, we have this item. This is a recommendation from a gentleman named Howard Dix. He was an important man with the OSS. Tell us more about Dix and exactly what is said here.
So Howard Dix was essentially the Moe's boss, and really liked Berg a lot, was a big fan. Berg rubbed some of the people in the OSS the wrong way. He was very cavalier. He really marched to his own drummer, and was kind of a pain in the neck sometimes. I mean, he would do his own thing, and but Dix really liked him. And you know what? He would produce good material. It was just in a very unorthodox way. So Dix, after the war, this document's from 1946. He wrote up and actually worked on this letter for quite a while. A letter recommending that Moe Berg get the what was known as the Medal of Freedom. And this is different, not to be confused with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which in fact is pretty confusing, but it's a different thing. But it's an award, high award for a civilian, and he wanted to nominate Moe, and so he's talking about the various things that Moe did as best as he can. Still, a lot of what he would have liked to say was top secret, and he couldn't say. So he's saying, no, he's invaluable in a certain way, but he can't get into details because at that time it was still top secret. And so he recommended Berg for the award, and Berg won the award, but he refused to accept it, which is extremely unusual. You would think, what's wrong with accepting an award? They're just giving you a recognition for what you did. But he refused it for a number of reasons, and I won't go into all of them. It takes a long time. But one of them was he was interestingly, he was sort of embarrassed by it, and which does sort of connect with his wanting to be in the background. He didn't want to be in the foreground. He also felt that it might mean that he's going to get a lot of people talking to him about it, and he didn't want to talk about what he did frankly, he couldn't talk about some of what he did. And so he felt that would be disingenuous, you know, I have to not talk about it. It's going to sound like I'm bragging. Oh, I can't talk about this. Additionally, he was hoping that he would continue to work for actually by that time, the CIA, which never happened. So once the war was over, or soon after the war was over, he had no job with the OSS and then eventually the CIA. But he always hoped to continue working in that. And he thought actually the medal might more be a final, like, thanks a lot for your service, we'll see you later. But, and in effect, that's really what it was. So he never did continue to be a spy, even though, one, he wanted to, and two, he kind of implied that he was doing it. That he didn't tell people, yeah, I'm not doing it anymore. He would maintain this intentionally mysterious atmosphere about him.
Now, this letter refers to an assignment he was given. He was told to basically spy on a scientist named Heisenberg.
Right.
And if he had an indication that Heisenberg was onto the atomic bomb, well, he would have to carry out the assignment to a rather extreme measure. Tell us more about that.
Right. So the letter itself doesn't specifically talk about the fact that he was authorized to assassinate Werner Heisenberg. But that is, in fact, what he was authorized to do. He went to Switzerland when Werner Heisenberg went to neutral Switzerland to give a talk, and basically he was tasked as a spy to pose as a young scientist and go to the talks, try and learn as much as he could about Werner Heisenberg, who was heading up the physics program for the Nazis, and it was known that they were looking into atomic weapon, but the question was, how far along are they? And if he felt that they were pretty close, that he should actually right there in public, it wasn't in the background, in the public, shoot Werner Heisenberg and kill him. Heisenberg was a Nobel Prize winning physicist back in '32. So I mean, the guy it wasn't like he was a unknown character. He was a very, very famous physicist. So he did go, Berg did go and attend at least one lecture, I think there may have been a few, and actually met Heisenberg and hung out with him a little bit, and eventually came to the conclusion that they weren't particularly close, and so didn't assassinate him. Yeah. But it's a very interesting story, and that everything really points to that part of the story, which is exciting, being actually factually correct, that really was something that was there.
Tom, do we have any sense of how Moe Berg felt about the possibility of taking another life? Was that something he would have been willing to do if circumstances deemed it necessary?
Certainly on paper, he would be willing to do it. That's part of the oath doesn't say specifically, and you'd be willing to kill people, but it says you're going to work for the people and you're going to do what they tell you to do. Yeah. So yeah, he had his pistol, and he had his suicide pill in case he needed to take that himself. Now, how did he really feel about it? I don't know, and maybe he would have not done a great job of it. I suppose this is one of these situations if like you don't really know until you're in that moment. Yeah. But he did come to the conclusion that they weren't particularly close, and he was correct, as it turns out. Now, history now tells us, we learned a lot more. They really weren't that close, thankfully. And but just because he reported that back to Howard Dix and the OSS didn't mean that they didn't stop looking into it. They continued to look into this issue, because at one moment one guy is of the opinion that they weren't close doesn't mean that it was a fact. So throughout the war, they continued to look into it and monitor it and question, where are the Nazis on this?
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Now, there's one other aspect to this exhibit we have not talked about, and that is the film that came out 2 years ago called The Catcher Was a Spy. Mm-hmm. We did obtain some artifacts from the film. Tell us about the process of acquiring these items, and let's begin with this rather beautiful fedora.
Yeah, it's really neat, isn't it? So On the left, you see actor Paul Rudd, who portrayed Moe Berg, and who's also a huge Kansas City Royals fan, by the way. And a fedora that you're seeing here is not actually the exact one that he's wearing in this picture. Very commonly in movies, you have duplicates of props or costumes in this case, because if something were to happen with one, you quickly switch to the other rather than holding up shooting, looking for another fedora, right? So you've always got a backup because you're wasting a lot of time otherwise. I actually wanted to see if this was the very one in that photo, because that would have been fun to say that. And it isn't. It's incredibly close, though. But there's subtle differences. But we did want to get a fedora, and because we want to talk about that, that sort of very film noir kind of a feel, spy, and it evokes that, even though lots of people wore fedoras in the 40s. But so we got that. And we also acquired this artifact, the fedora, and this Catrice Mask. The mask is actually a donation. The fedora is a loan to us by the movie studio. They generously donated this mask. And for those who are paying special attention at the beginning of the talk, this is essentially the same model as the one that Moberg really used. So they did their homework. They got a spitter model, although the leather down below is sort of obscuring part of it, so it kind of ruins the concept for the spitter. But nevertheless, they got something pretty close. What's funny is this movie prop is in worse condition than the actual mask that Moberg really did use. But you don't want a really good condition one in a movie. You want it to make it look like it's used. So we got this as well. Once again, a movie prop. And I didn't show a picture of the actual costume, but it's what Paul Rudd is wearing in this movie still, which is an important story from Moberg's time in Japan in 1934. And that is that he wore a kimono. He left a baseball game. Nobody really missed him because he wasn't really playing in it. And he dressed up as typical men in Tokyo at the time. The number of men were wearing Western clothing, but people were still wearing kimono, and he dressed that way. He slicked back his hair, and that is the movie, so Paul Rudd's got his hair looking really good for Paul Rudd, but and he snuck up to the top of the tallest building in Tokyo at the time, the 7th-story building, St. Luke's Hospital. He actually pretended as if he was going to go deliver flowers to someone there. He got on the elevator, he tossed the flowers, and said, I don't need those anymore, and he went all the way to the top, got on the rooftop, and took his Bell and Howell camera, movie camera, and he shot footage of Tokyo. And this is the part where a lot of people say, he is spying for the U.S. government in 1934. This is, over half a dozen years before the U.S. was involved in World War II. But he's spying for the government. There is absolutely no evidence at all that that was the case. More likely, he's doing this because, one, he wanted to take some footage of his trip, but more importantly, he just thought this was kind of a fun, secret thing to do. And he his whole life was doing weird, mysterious, quirky things. And, as it turns out, later on, he took this film. So this is after his playing career is over. This is years later. And he thought it might be useful for the war effort. This is before he was applying for the job with the OSS. And he sent it to the military and said, this might be of use. Actually, he said, I'd like to meet with you. I have some film that may be of use. They met with him. He showed the film. They said, thank you very much. And that's been overplayed in a lot of ways. People think that, this was the footage that was critical for the Doolittle bombing raid in 1942 over Tokyo. Well, that's half a dozen years later. The city had changed so much. They already had other footage by that time. So it makes for a great story that this is the footage that was critical to the Doolittle bombing raid, but it really doesn't add up. But what it really does add up with is it's consistent with the enigmatic, secretive behavior throughout his career of Moe Berg, whether he was a ball player, whether he was, during his playing career, after his playing career, as actually a spy, but especially his life, quarter of a century he lived after the war was over, is probably the most mysterious part of his entire life. Is the most recent part. Very little is known about it. He pops up here and there. He has no permanent home. He's living with friends or family and showing up, and then just almost like he's the wind. He just disappears. You hear independent sources talking about how he just sort of all of a sudden disappeared. And that was his behavior. And this isn't really that different from that behavior. It's just happens to be interesting because it could have had connections to the war.
He really went through these elaborate means. He probably didn't need the flowers to gain access to the hospital. But he thought, well, that's going to really look good. That'll make for a better story.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And listen, it probably wasn't a bad idea. It didn't hurt. Wasn't going to hurt anything. And maybe it'll end up helping. And so it was a good instinct. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in talking with people with the OSS and getting the job, he talked about the kinds of things that he's done.
Yeah.
They probably thought it was a little peculiar, but they also thought this guy is all in on being a spy, and seems to have a lot of the boxes checked for a person that would work well that way.
We have a few minutes remaining with our senior curator, Tom Schieber, talking about the exhibit, Moe Berg, Big League Spy. We want to take some of your questions. You can type those into the Zoom group chat. We have a couple of questions already. One comes to us from Steve Sankner. He wants to know, did Moberg socialize with his teammates, or did he basically keep to himself?
Yeah, so he did socialize with his teammates, but it was always on his own terms. So many teammates were interviewed afterwards and talked about him and said, oh, he was a great friend, even though I never really knew him that well. And yes, he'd go out, he'd hang out with them for things, but then he'd just be on his own too. He was absolutely an independent soul. So if he wanted to hang out with people, great. And if he didn't, great. And as a ball player, especially at that time, baseball really afforded you the ability to do these kinds of things. You had to show up for work for a number of hours each day. So yes, and you had to answer to your boss, the manager. But otherwise, you're traveling around, and the time that is your own is truly your own. You can do whatever you want. So he would go to museums. He loved museums. Or he would travel to various sites, or he would just stay in the room and read. Or if you wanted to, he'd hang out with people or go on a date, whatever he wanted to do. But baseball was really afforded him the lifestyle that he really liked, as did spying, even more so, because spying, he figured, hey, I can really disappear for a long period of time and no one's going to question me on that because I kind of have to do that to pull this off.
Ted Noor writes, I see that Berg broke in with the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 1920s. Seems to me he would have fit right in with the Daffiness Boys of Brooklyn. Certainly would have helped with his deep cover.
Yeah, and he broke in with Brooklyn. He actually tried out for him in 1921 when he was 19, but he eventually got picked up by them in 23 as a 21-year-old. And he did play a little bit in the minors and actually had a great year in Reading, Pennsylvania, where he batted well over 300 in the highest level of minors at the time. So, I mean, like I said, it didn't look like he was going to be a terrible hitter. And he wasn't a terrible hitter. He's a slightly less than average hitter in the major leagues. But he traveled around a lot. He played for 5 different ball clubs in 15 major league seasons. But the vast majority of those seasons, he would play a few dozen games. But he really hung around. And one of the questions that I always wondered about was, how does this guy who's a second or third string catcher fashion a 15-year major league career? I mean, it's not like it was a 5-year major league career. He played 15 years, so much of it playing 30 games, 40 games. And I think it's because he was well-liked. He was well-liked by management. And I don't think we can underestimate his ability as a player, essentially a player coach. Here's a guy who was a really great catcher, very brainy, really knew, he was a thinking man's baseball player, really knew the game. And so why not have him as a coach who could play a little bit? So it looks like he's a player, But I think in a large part, he was coaching for many of those years. And you listen to pictures, and they talk about how he would talk to them and say, "Hey, I'm going to help you. You know, whether it's spring training or even in regular season games, I'm going to help you make it. Stick with me."
We have one final question from a viewer. It's from Annie Lindsay. She writes, did anyone at the time outside of the OSS know or suspect that Berg was a spy, such as family or friends?
No, at the time, he wasn't talking about it, but there was always the air of mystery and the air of might be involved with government work, and that air lasted not only through the war, but like I said, into the 50s, into the 1960s even. And he liked, like I said, he embraced the mysteriousness. It wasn't like he was, he worked at creating this very peculiar, quirky, secretive character. And so when someone would ask him specifically about something like that, what are you doing these days? He was always very coy about it, but purposely coy. He wanted people to go, I wonder what this guy's, I think he's doing something. But he would never flat out tell you anything. And another interesting characteristic of him, once again, you hear it from a number of independent sources. When he would show up somewhere and someone would recognize him, they say, "Hey, what you doing these days?" He would say, he would do one of these. "You never saw me." And it was and lots of people talk about this. A ball player bumps into him in an elevator. "I wasn't here." You know, if you're doing that, you want people to start thinking things, because if not, if you want to be just an anonymous guy, say, "Hey, how are you?" and they would just sort of shoot the breeze a little bit and then disappear. But no, he went one up and showed off this level of mystery.
He died in 1972, nearly 50 years ago, but we're still talking about him today.
Yeah.
And I guess he would have liked that people remember him 5 decades later.
I think so. I really do think so. And think about it, Bruce. I mean, you know, baseball backwards and forwards. How many guys who are second and third string catchers from the late 20s and through the 30s do we talk about? I mean, nothing against them, but they don't have this incredibly rich story. One way I like to think about it is when you're a 8 or 10-year-old kid, typically, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? "Oh, I want to be a baseball player." He was a big league baseball player. "Oh, I want to be James Bond. I want to be a spy." He was a spy. The only thing he wasn't was a fireman. Otherwise, he did he did 2 of the big 3. So he fulfilled every 8 to 10-year-old kid's dream, or not every, but I mean a lot of kids' dreams. So hey, listen, I think he was a real success.
Absolutely. The exhibit, Moe Berg Big League Spy, will remain up for the rest of 2020. So if you want to see it, you need to get out here either this month, October, November, or early December. It will be taken down at the very latest in January of 2021. If you want to make sure to see it, definitely get here by early to mid-December. We want to thank Tom Schieber for being with us. We'll ask Tom to hold on for just a moment. In the meantime, I want to remind everybody that a great way to support these programs that we do here at the Hall of Fame is through our membership program. Fans from around the country and around the world can be part of the team that is trying to preserve games history and celebrating the all-time greats. If you become a member, you'll receive a full roster of benefits, including unlimited admission to the museum for a full year and 6 copies of our magazine, Memories and Dreams. Membership brings with it the knowledge that you are a part of baseball history and the effort to preserve it. Be a part of something greater. Visit baseballhall.org/join. Again, that's baseballhall.org/join. Tom, thanks again. As always, a wealth of information. We do really appreciate your time and your insights.
Bruce, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Happy to do it.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Great job. Our senior curator here at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We thank everybody for joining us here virtually in Cooperstown today. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.